The Adventure Like No Other, a miniature railway feature-length story. It is written and based on a storyline by Michael White. This audiobook is performed by the author. Story recap. Our friends have found themselves in a different world after travelling through the telepathic engineered corridor, or the TEC for short, which is a machine that Corpse restored back in their own world. Now stuck in this other world, the group had taken shelter in a small town ruled by an aged dictator who was on the brink of death. That is, before Grinding Gears were able to restore his youth by the means of the fuel that powers the TEC, which apparently is a kind of youth serum. Now restored to his youth, the dictator, Frank, is now ready to pounce on the group, who had taken shelter by working for the town's only transport, a run-down narrow-gauge railway. But a word-of-mouth legend about the group might be able to stop Frank once and for all. But what could it be? Chapter 6. New Positions.
Alright, get up you lot. Come on, get moving. Here, don't think I saw you try to hide under the bed sheets. Those treadmills aren't going to move themselves, you know.
This was just a fraction of the noise both Grinding Gears had to put up with while trying to sleep since Frank had given them their new positions. They were lying in their beds in the room that they were brought to, only this time without the ankle chains ensuring they didn't leave. The noise all around them was unlike anything they ever heard of while working for Bernard. Sounds of machines whirring, engines roaring, and in between these were the sounds of cracks, shouting, and the most alarming, screaming. These screams were not the sort you'd hear in horror films, no. These screams were a variety of different kinds, ones of shock, surprise, horror, anger, sadness, or downright unexplainable. They rang out through the stone walls and window bars within the fort, giving the place a somewhat underworld ambience. Gears turned over in his bed and opened an eye. Grinder was sitting up against one of the windows, staring out into the courtyards.
What is it?
Gears asked, sitting up.
There seems to be a kind of derby going on out there. A sort of monster truck type of derby. Come and take a look at these.
Gears walked over and saw what Grinder had seen. The courtyards were made up to resemble a Roman Colosseum with a dirt track scored into the ground to give each driver its own lane. One by one, a series of obscure contraptions were brought out from a hangar on the side of the site. Some had what looked like tractor wheels fitted, while others had exhaust pipes the size of houses, each one pumping out clouds upon clouds of sickening blackish-green exhaust. And the sound of the engines made you think that 10 tigers were placed in each vehicle and were angrily trying to rip each other's insides out.
Would you look at the size of those things?
Grinder awed.
I hardly think Bernard would have the money or the mindset to think of such a vehicle as this lot.
I wonder what the drivers are like, ponders Gears. Surely machines like this would require some kind of control to prevent any carnage.
I think that's them there, pointed Grinder.
Gears squinted, and amongst the quantities of machinery, he could just make out the pinpoint digits of a pair of eyes peering out under the mass of overalls and helmet.
How's he supposed to see through all that and drive at the same time?
Looks like we're about to see, answered Grinder, as a squat figure of a flagman came running out. Amongst the machines he was like an ant, but showed no fear as he took the centre point of the starting line. The machines growled loudly as they edged their way to the line. Then, with a smooth swing of his arm, the flagman started the race. The sound of an explosion took place. Smoke and dust filled the air as the machines took off. What became of the flagman was now part of the dirt track itself.
The speed of those things! Exclaimed Grinder. I wonder what they plan on doing with them afterwards.
Enter them into the show. Miranda had appeared before them. Whichever vehicle wins the morning's race enters into the show at the end of the month to claim the grand prize.
What show?
Asked Gears, but Miranda didn't answer. You ought to join Frank for his morning consumption, she said plainly.
You mean breakfast? Asked Grinder.
If that's what you call it, said Miranda, then turned to go. Gears noticed that there was a trace of sorrow in her expression and felt deep down that he and Grinder had something to do with it.
Miranda,
he said. She stopped. Listen, see, the thing with us restoring Frank back to his young self was not what we had planned on doing. In fact, we hadn't planned on being here to begin with. You gotta understand. Miranda didn't turn round, but Gears could hear her utter, I know. I just hope that for that brief time there was hope for all of us. Now please, he'll be ever so cross if you don't attend. She hurried off, her ankle chains rattling through the corridor.
Welcome, my boys. Please come in.
Frank sat at the head of his grand dining table in the great hall. It was laid with the most exquisite of foods. At first, Gran and Gears were a little scared to attend this meeting, but seeing the food and noticing how hungry they were made them completely forget all feeling.
I thought I'd let you lads have first dips on the buffet before the troops arrive back from their night's patrol. And trust me, you'll be lucky to get anything before they show up.
And when would that be? Inquired Grinder. Frank checked his watch before signalling a countdown with his other hand.
Grubs up, lads, he said, before the storm took hold.
On each side of the room, the doors burst open to where hundreds upon hundreds of soldiers burst in and forced themselves upon the buffet. Gran and Gears took cover. It was like a massacre of foodstuffs. The room was filled with the sounds of shouting, yelling, slobbering, and belching. 2 soldiers ended up in a fight over one of them taking a piece of toast from the other's plate. Through the air went bits of scrambled eggs, pancakes, cereal, sausages, black puddings, and all other forms of breakfast-related consumptions. What looked like a hard-boiled egg landed in front of Gears as he and Grinder took shelter under the table. But just as Gears reached his hand out to pick it up, a knife appeared like a bullet shot and impaled the egg, causing him to retract it quickly. The yolk oozed out of it like a wound before it was thrusted back up and soundly devoured along with its brethren. Gears felt he was going to be sick, but he didn't have to, for someone else above him was sick for him.
"Well, better make some more room," sloshed a voice from above.
Before Granny could do anything else, a waterfall of vomit cascaded down his side of the table and pooled across the floor.
"Oh, that's better,"
the voice said, before becoming a range of slobbering scrunches once more.
"These people are appalling," whispered Grinder in hysterics. "They're as bad as our lot in the staff canteen."
Soon there came the scraping of chairs as the eaters evicted themselves from the table, and as quick as they appeared, they were gone. Gingerly, Gran and Gears poked their heads up from the edge of the tabletop. Mounds of chewed pink and grey slush was all that was left of the exquisite buffet, with breadcrumbs absorbing whatever juices were left on the surface.
"As I said, you better be lucky to get anything to eat when they show up," smiled Frank,
who was dabbing his mouth with the corner of a napkin. Unlike the rest of the table, his section was left spotless, with only a few smudges of brown sauce that could be seen on his empty plate.
"I can't remember the last time I had a good fry-up. The old, or shall I say, restored youthful system has taken some time to get used to eating solid foods again."
He paused as he looked over to the brothers, who were already looking forlorn at what was once a really appetizing breakfast spread, was now looking like the ground of an unkempt dairy farm. For once in his life, Frank took pity on the boys.
"Don't worry," he said, smiling, "because to show my thanks for your kind offering to restore my youth, I'd like to give you a special medieval cuisine."
"Medieval?" the brothers repeated, puzzled. At which Frank clicked his fingers. A loud squeal rang out through the room, at which another set of doors burst open. 2 chef slaves came into the room, dragging a frightened and screaming swine. The creature looked terrified as the chefs tethered it completely to a metal stand which had been erected from within the floor. "What are you—" Gears started before Frank hushed him with a quick hand gesture. "Watch," he said. "You'll like this bit." Another guard had entered the room, carrying a large gas tank with a weaponized nozzle. It hissed threateningly. The chefs turned the metal pole round so that the pig was facing the guard, before making a run for it. Frank donned on a pair of sunglasses from within his jacket and, grinning like a Joker card, called out, "Light her up!" A jet of fire burst out of the weapon's nozzle and struck the pig. It screamed in one last desperate attempt to gain some sort of mercy from its captors before its screams died out as the insides were cooked completely. After a minute, the jet was stopped and the room was filled with the aroma of charred metal and fried pork. Frank stepped up from his chair and, to the brothers' horrified disgust, ripped a charred leg from the remains.
Done to a turn," he said as he tasted it.
"I think it's the fear of the swine that gives it its unique flavour. Now, please, have some." Gears could hardly utter a word.
"Oh, please don't say you're not hungry, after all the time we've gone through to ensure you boys are properly fed," Frank added.
A growl from his main guard Cyril brought the boys round, to which they each slowly took a bit of charred pig and took a bite. After a few chews, their faces suddenly changed.
"It was delicious. They had never eaten anything as good as this in their entire lives." "It's so tender," exclaimed Grinder. "Each bite is incredible," scrunched Gears for a mouthful. "Is there any applesauce going?"
Coming right up, smiled Frank, nodding to the chefs. So, tell me about yourselves, lads. What was your life like before you came to join me? He had to wait for a while for a reply, as the sound of the brothers eating was more audible than any of the words that they could say. In the far corner, Miranda watched with worried concern. "And what's this?" exclaimed Casey, as Jane handed him a bowl. "Porridge," Carr said. "Now eat it up, it's good for you." Casey scooped a spoonful and watched as it trickled from his spoon and dripped back into his bowl. It was as thin as water, with small lumps of oats floating on top of the lukewarm milk. "What I'd give for a good fry-up," he sighed. "Well, it was all that we were given," said Jane, a little hurt from this remark. "I'm sorry it's not hot enough, but I ran out of blocks for the fire." "It's fine," said Whitehouse. "It's actually not that bad, like a pick-me-up smoothie." Casey glared at Whitehouse, who swiped the last bit of his share before wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He tried a bit for taste, but was clearly not a fan. "So, what's to do then?" asked Corpse, sipping his cold tea. "Seeing as we're giving those two railway workers the push, we'll have to stand in for them, yes?" "Well, I said to Wilbert that we'll help get this place in some sort of order today that will help get the railway in a sort of better operational state," said Cars. "With just the 5 of us?" asked Whitehouse. "Seems like an odd number for a group of navvies." "Oh, we'll manage somehow. Now, the first thing I think that needs looking over would be that." Cars pointed the group over to an object covered in a large tarpaulin, left all alone in a siding. "With the coach, I asked Wilbert if we can use it. With it, it will allow us to get to and from the tech at the end of each day." Cars pulled the cover off to reveal an old European-based tank engine. It looked very boxy in its design, but a quaint and charming little engine it was. "What do you think, Roy?" asked Cars. "Do you think you can do something with her?" "You're asking a lot from me, Mark," Corpse said, looking anxiously at the engine. "I mean, you've got me working on that coach, and that still needs work done to it. And I've also the tech to get repaired, somehow. And now you want me to repair this?" "No," Carr said, forgetting. "I'm sorry, I forgot you had so much on your plate as it is." "Well, I suppose we could always use one of the others if we—" "I didn't say I couldn't do it," interrupted Corpse, climbing onto the footplate. He did a quick scan of some of the controls, taps and levers. He opened the hatchway into the firebox and peered in. "Ah," he said disappointedly. "There's the rub." "Pardon?" asked Casey, climbing up. Corpse showed him what he meant. "The firebox is completely rusted through. I doubt we'll be able to get this repaired unless a new firebox can be sourced." "I think I saw one in the workshops yesterday during the, misunderstanding," said Whitehouse. "Well, you three go and have a look while Jane does the dishes, and I'll see what's to do with the coach," said Cars. "You don't mind doing that, Jane?" he asked while walking away. "No, not at all," said Jane, giving him a look. She was still feeling tired, but trying not to show it to the others as she went to collect some water from the water tower. The three searched the sheds and workshops all over, but there was no sign of any spare pie boxes. "I suppose we could make one if we have the right materials," suggested Casey. Corpse was looking at some canisters that were left around the back of the sheds. An idea was brooding in his mind, and if he can get a rig made up of whatever there was, it could work. But he needed to check a few other areas of the engine before making this decision final. "I think," he said as he stepped round from the back of the sheds, "that we give the boiler of the engine a check over. If she's going to steam again, we better make sure that she can take the pressure good and proper." "I agree," said Whitehouse. "The last thing we need is have an engine going bang on us during our run." "Now, I think what we could do is to divide the space into a separate compartment," said Cars, once Jane was available to help. "If we use some leftover tarpaulin, we can drape it down from the ceiling, and that way we can give each of us some room to sleep in. Maybe if we bunch these bench seats together, we can make some beds." "Yeah, but that would only allow us to make 3 beds in total," pointed Jane. "Nonsense, there was room for all of us last night, so there should be enough room for us now. Come on and help me shift this seat over." "I'm telling you, there isn't enough room," explained Jane, but Cars had already taken hold of one end of the benches. "Trust me," he said, "it'll work." Wilbert had walked over to his office to look over some letters they'd been meaning to sign. As he was approaching his door, he saw Harry standing by the platform watching the group. "They seem to be making themselves comfortable," he noted. "Indeed," agreed Wilbert. "That young fellow Mark seems quite the leader of them, though a bit much for the others to cope with, you think?" "Aye, he seems to be a couple of sleepers short of a branch line, that one," chuckled Harry. He looked over and noticed Wilbert was looking forlorn. "It doesn't seem all that long ago since your wee lass was helping us here," he commented. "I just hope that wherever she is, she's in no pain," sighed Wilbert. "That young one with that lot reminds me so much of her. Oh, Lord knows where she is now. Harry rested his arm on his friend's shoulder.
I'm sure that one day you'll both be reunited, he said.
One day, repeated Wilbert as he walked into his office. See, I told you it wouldn't work, Jane said as she and Cars struggled with the other seats. There's only room to make up 3 beds using these benches pushed together. All right. Just let me think of something to sort it out, grumbled Cars stressfully. He leaned on one of the benches as he pondered what to do. Jane, meanwhile, was busy looking over some bits of tarpaulin with some riveted holes made into them, and was looking for some rope.
I suppose 2 of us could share a bed each, he pondered openly. Maybe that might work.
I'd rather sleep in my own bed than having to share one, said Jane. Plus, what about the others? They'd agree with me, and there's only one single bed left over. Who are you thinking of taking that one? All right. Just to think of something else then, said Cars testfully. He shut his eyes and tried to concentrate. However, that was going to be more difficult than expected. You've got to be kidding me! No way! I'm not allowing it! For crying out loud, said Cars, stepping out onto the balcony. What's going on out there? He called out to the 3 working on the engine. It was Casey's angry tone that answered. Why don't you ask Dr. Frankenstein here? Of all the stupid ideas he's come up with, what? Asked Cars. He leapt from the coach and sprinted over to the engine, where he found Casey and Corpse standing on the footplate. It's beyond anything engineering, and it's a sin to all railway workers, Casey verbally commented. Look, shut up, Case, and tell me what's wrong, said Cars. Casey pointed sharply to the engine's firebox. That is what's wrong, he thundered. Cars peered into the firebox and saw Whitehouse was busy fixing the last bolt of what appeared to be a kind of rig holding several nozzles below the boiler. Because of the lack of any spare fireboxes, I found a whole load of these old gas tanks around the back of the sheds, explained Corpse. They all appear to be unused, so I thought of this brilliant idea of converting the engine to be powered by gas. The boiler is still in good condition and should be enough to take the pressure given. I've never in all my born days have seen a steam engine powered by gas, grumbled Casey. Well, there are some steam engines out there that are powered by gas, Case, noted Whitehouse, climbing out of the firebox. Those don't count as steam engines, Casey corrected sharply. He closed the firebox doors with a sharp kick. I very much doubt we'll get so much as a wheel turn before the tanks go out. Look, have I ever let you down with my engineering skills? Asked Corpse. They all looked at him and showed with their hands of where they were, stating the obvious. This ordeal wasn't my fault, Corpse confirmed. And if you continue to state that, then I won't even bother repairing the tech and just let us stay here for the rest of our lives. Look, let's just stop arguing and try and stay focused on the task at hand, said Whitehouse. I agree, said Cars. Now, Roy, you continue to what you have to do, but make sure that we have enough power to get to where we want to go to and back. Chris, I know you're offended by this change, but we just have to make do with what we have. And you, Mike... Cars paused as he tried to think of what Whitehouse had done during all this to cause offence. Yes? He asked, raising an eyebrow suspiciously. Just don't annoy your cousin with claims that he got us into this mess. Well, you did it too. That's no excuse. Now come on and let's keep going. I'll have to sort this other issue of our sleeping quarters. I don't think you have to worry, said a voice. Cars and the others turned and stared in surprise. While he and the others were arguing, Jane had rigged up a kind of fold-out canopy which sat at the side of the coach, which at the ends hung 2 hammocks made from spare tarpaulin. This way, it allows us to keep the 3 beds in the coach and have the other 2 in the hammocks. I based off something I read in a book. Now that is what I call engineering, exclaimed Casey. Bags I get a hammock. And I don't think my back is able to tackle another night's sleep on that coach floor, added Whitehouse. So, at least we now know who's sleeping where then, smiled Jane. Said Cars. He went over and checked the structure for stability. Quite good, I suppose. Right, well then, while I'm seeing Wilbert about what jobs we are to do this week, you can gather some food for the lunches later, and maybe give the site a quick tidy up. But Jane said. Good, said Cars, and walked away. She was really tired now, so Jane didn't feel like retorting. There might be time for that later on, once she'd had some more food inside her stomach. That is, if there was enough to suffice both her and the others. As she gathered her tackle bag, Jane could see Casey and Whitehouse trying out the hammocks. It was like trying to climb onto a log in a river. At one point, Casey thought he got the knack for it, before swinging round and round several times and falling flat on his face on the ground. There should be a method on how to do it, said Whitehouse. He tried stepping in, but keeping a balance in the hammock proved more difficult than he thought, and shortly, just like Casey, he found himself flat on his face. I'll show you, said Jane, and walked over to demonstrate. You first set yourselves in sideways with your feet on the ground, right? Then swing yourself over, thus making sure you remain inside the hammock. Then, with careful balancing, you're able to rock yourself to sleep. Like this.
Huh, said Casey, impressed.
Huh. Well, thanks, Jane. We'll try that. Maybe later on, whispered Whitehouse. He pointed. With the rocking motion of the hammock, Jane had already fallen into the hands of Morpheus and was soon sound asleep. I suppose she did look a bit tired, noted Casey, as he and Whitehouse quietly walked back to the engine. However, Jane's time in the arms of Morpheus didn't last very long. She had only been asleep for no longer than 2 minutes when what sounded like gunfire caused her to jump out and fall off the hammock. The other three peered around from the engine and looked. It sounds like it came from the station, said Jane, getting to her feet, and before anyone could stop her, she sprinted over to see if there was anything she could do to help. As she came to the corner of the station's main building, Harry suddenly appeared. "Thank God you're safe," he said. "I need you to hide, all of you." "But why?" asked Jane, but Harry didn't explain. Grabbing her arm, he pulled her towards the storeroom near the canteen. "Don't come out until I say it's all clear," he said, as the gunshots sounded again. Jane nodded, and Harry hurried over to inform the others. Jane carefully opened the storeroom door a fraction and listened. The gunshots didn't sound like the ones she expected to hear. It sounded more like an engine backfiring at a great scale. Now she could hear the sounds of revving and a roar of a powerful engine heading towards the station. She looked across the yard and could see Harry running back after getting the others to keep out of sight. Wilbur came out of his office just as what looked like a chopper bike on steroids pulled up by the station gates, to which the helmeted driver disembarked with the energy of a grasshopper. Skid whooped with joy as he removed his helmet and tossed it without looking onto the bike's handlebars. "Are they all hidden?" asked Wilbur quietly. "All except the bossy one," muttered Harry. "Can't for the life of me work out where he's gone off to." "The sooner this is done, the better for them," sighed Wilbert. "Time for the monthly charge, Bert," Skid called, walking up. "This is a very bad time, Skid," Wilbert said weakly. "I've heard it all before, you old dodger." I've had to let 2 of my staff go because of incompetence." "Oh, dearie me, how unfortunate for yourself," Skid said mockingly. "Well, this doesn't make much difference, Billy boy. I'll begin with strict instructions from higher up that taxes are to be collected there and then on the mark, which appears to be no. So, if you don't mind, cough up the goods." Wilbert sighed and dispensed a small wooden box from his person and poured its contents into a sack that Skid had opened at the ready. A small handful of brown coins trickled in. "Now, come on now, Bill. Don't be holding back on me. Don't make me start setting the big boys down to ensure the full payment is made." "Or better yet, a visit from Frank himself." "I'm sure on the slightest breath of air, upon his skin will cause him to crumble to ashes," scoffed Harry. Skid's grin didn't change. "You'd say that, but thanks to the efforts of some new friends, old, or should I say, young Frank is back and in full control of the situation as before." Wilbert looked up in horror at the mention of this. Skid chuckled. "Thought that might raise the hair on your old raisin head on hearing that. Now, enough holding back." "But that's all there is," protested Wilbert. "And if we had more, we needed to ensure our railway keeps going. How can we if you keep taking our needs to ensure it doesn't?" "That's your problem, mate," Skid snapped. "Now, I won't say this again. Give me the loot." "He said we haven't got any more," barked Harry, advancing forwards. Quickly, Skid threw up a fist, and while Harry was caught off guard by it, his legs swooped round and tackled him to the ground. The elderly guard hit the floor hard as Skid straightened up. With a flick of his wrist, he produced a fine-tipped knife from a hidden compartment in his jacket sleeve. "Looks like I'll have to show you what happens when people don't pay up," he said, and grabbing Wilbert with a chokehold, held him up against the wall. Jane could see everything from the storeroom door and tried to advance to help, but Harry saw her, and the look on his face told her to stay put. "Let's see, I think a little off the nose, mused Skid, as he pressed the blade between Wilbert's eyes. Wilbert coughed heavily while in the firm grip, and Harry was in too much pain to help. Then, everything happened at once. There was a flash, and Skid was slammed against the old station wall. Cars rubbed the feeling back into his shoulder as he gritted his teeth grimly. "Back off!" he yelled. Skid picked himself up and stared Cars down. "Ho, ho, ho, ho! A feisty one, I see. A sort of bodyguard for yourself, Bill?" Wilbur just gasped as he regained breathing once more. "Why don't you do us all a big favour and leave while you still can?" threatened Cars. Skid couldn't help but laugh aloud. "Ho, ho! And he's a jokester, too. It just gets better and better. With a shoulder move like that, I'm surprised Frank hasn't gotten you lined up for the show. You make a fine addition." Cars just continued staring at Skid, his brow furrowing more. "All right, I can take a hint," Skid said at last. He stopped as he picked up his helmet.
But be warned, Billy boy. Don't think you'll get away with this scot-free on this. I'll be sure to inform his lordship on what's going on. And be sure to send him my compliments too, Cars called. A blast of the engine's roar sounded as Skid started his bike. Cars turned to help Harry up before seeing to Wilbert, but he failed to notice Skid steering the bike round and aiming it right in his direction. With a devilish growl, the bike accelerated towards him. "Look out!" yelled Harry, and with all his might pushed Cars out of the way. Skid swerved and drifted round where he stopped right next to the storeroom doors, causing Jane to gasp aloud. He turned and their eyes met. Jane stared into those grim, shadowed eyes through the visor of his helmet, and for a brief second thought she'd see a sly wink coming from deep within. With another roar, the bike shot off, leaving a trail of dust in its wake. Recovering from the brief shock, Jane hurried out over to where Cars and the others were picking themselves up. "That bloody idiot could have killed us!" exclaimed Harry through sweat-drenched white hair. "I'm not surprised with a bike like that," agreed Cars. "He wasn't referring to Skid," Wilbert retorted crossly. Cars looked at them both. "What, me? What have I done? So much for a thanks for saving you from being choked to death." "Do you have any idea who that was?" growled Harry. "That was one of Frank's leading men. I'm just glad it wasn't his right-hand man Cyril. Then where would you be?" "With a persona like that, he's spoiling for a fight. I wouldn't worry too much about him, Wilbert. And hey," Cars walked over and picked up the sack that Skid dropped. "At least I got your money back." "Shouldn't worry. After what he's just told us." "What are you on about?" "That Frank has regained his youth, and because of that, he'll cause even more havoc for us." "But you said that only the serum that the tech is powered by is the only thing that can do that," said Jane. "So how can he get hold of it if he doesn't know it's there?" Harry loaded his head grimly. "I've got a feeling that his men have found it, with the remains of that machine, sometime after you arrive. Lord knows when, though. We'll have to look up the line and see for ourselves," said Cars aloud. "You'll do no such thing," snapped Wilbert, striking Cars with his stick. "The only thing you can do right now is to keep out of things that don't concern you. Granted, I am grateful for you for saving our funds, but you are not experienced enough to be dealing with the likes of Skid. And I think it's best for you to return to your companions and only assist when we tell you to," Harry said firmly. Without another word, Cars turned and marched back to the coach. Jane watched on, concerned. "I'm sorry about Mark. He's had some unpleasant experiences with a group almost as similar to that other fella in our world, though not as foul as he was. Is your neck all right? I can take a look at it for you." "Don't worry about it, dear," smiled Wilbert. "I've been through far much worse than this. But I think your friend will need to be taken down a peg or two if he's to retain a position here." "And maybe a few more pegs in other areas," muttered Jane to herself. But she didn't know that Wilbert heard her. The others stepped out from the coach where they were hiding and saw Cars coming towards them. "Who was that?" asked Whitehouse. "Nothing that you should worry about," Cars said quickly. His mind was racing with both frustration, anger, and questions of what to do next. "Are you all right?" Corpse asked. "I'm fine," said Cars bluntly, climbing the steps. "Are you sure?" "For God's sake! Will you just get off my back and get back to the engine and leave me alone?" snapped Cars, and shut himself into his compartment. "Jeez, what's biting him?" muttered Casey. "He's acting like a puff viper the way he spoke to us." "I'm sure come later today he'd forgotten all about it," said Whitehouse. "But then again, I'm not sure if he will." "And then there was the time we caused 2 of the fleet stock to go out of action and have the blame being put towards his crew, though the plan did have its hiccups when they turned our plan against us at the last minute." Frank sat with his head in one hand as the brothers told him about their schemes with the Model Engineer Society. He yawned heavily as Grinder brought the recent tale to a close. "Yes, all that there seems to be very good," he mused. "But from what I gather, the tales on which you two relayed have a somewhat related outcome that proves that what caused the plans to backfire boils down to one thing." "One thing?" asked Hughes. "Yes," said Frank. "The main problem here is that you two don't conduct your schemes to how it is plotted. Everything just somehow goes in a manner which you think is the original plan, but is in fact an abridged version, which has the most of the detailed information removed to save some time. Details that could be more important than you think." He could tell from their expressions that he wasn't making himself clear. "Think of your schemes as a stage play. You are the actors and the scheme is the script. Now, it is important that you follow the script to the digit. Yes, one can add small little improvs here and there to help move things along, but they also need to have a section which gives the audience some suspense.
The story can be a traditional fairy tale one, but just at the halfway point you add a little twist to the script that sends the audience on a different route than what their train of thought was originally on. The characters they were already used to by now have come to a situation that requires them to become more out of their comfort zone and start acting in ways you don't expect them to. Maybe a feature in the plot could have something which is far more different to what you expect to have. One that could leave the audience at the edge of their seats and not know what is to come next. Let me provide you with an example. Frank snapped his fingers and Miranda stepped into the room. You rang, sir? Miranda, send me Patrick Donnelly from Workshops number 7 and give Sophia O'Connor a 14862. Miranda paused and lowered her head sorrowfully. Very good, sir, she said quietly, and left. Gears could see that whatever 14862 was, it wasn't something that someone would joke about around the water cooler. Not that it's any of my business, he said, but what is 14862? All the workshops around the fortress operates by a range of numbered codes. 14862 is merely moving one worker up a rank. Oh, well, that doesn't sound too bad, I suppose, said Grinder. For a moment I thought it was going to be something bad. Miranda soon appeared again, accompanied by a small, skinny man in an oil-stained apron, and with such sweat on his forehead it could fill an ocean. Patrick Donnelly, sir, Miranda said, and turned to go. I'm so sorry, she whispered to him, who in return gave a puzzled and horrified look. Patrick, my dear old knick-knack paddywhack Patrick, please do come in and settle your aching form in a chair. Cyril walked over and placed a chair behind Patrick. Sit, he said, forcing the man down to his seat. Now, Patrick, you've been with us now for how long exactly? 43 years, sir, stammered Patrick. And during that time you've never once been late for work? Never. And you've never slacked off? Again, never, sir. Now, there we find the rub, because I've come to believe that you've just told me a little fib, right, sir? As far as I'm aware, you haven't been at your post for the last 3 minutes, well, 4 minutes now, within this very hour, and I'm afraid I cannot accept that. But, sir, I had to come off the floor in order to see you. And what for exactly? Will you tell me, sir? Oh, so you come in here and to give me orders when you should be out working on the floor like you're supposed to do. I must say, Patrick, I won't stand for this sort of behaviour at all, not one bit. But, sir, Patrick tried to stand and protest, but Cyril held him down. You'll be pleased to know that a 14862 has been placed before you arrived, so your work hasn't been abandoned, Frank informed. Patrick's eyes goggled wide, tears streaming down his oil-blackened cheeks. Oh, God, please, no, not that, anything but that, he screamed. Grinding Gears felt quite uneasy about what they were witnessing. Another 7 years, Pat, and you would have been promoted up rank for good service, but it looks like that would have to go to another worthy employee. It's been a good 43 years, but I think it's time that you thought about taking up show business. Cyril? Oh, God, no, sir, please, no! Cyril held Patrick down as he activated several leather straps that erected from the insides of the chair, which held him down like a trapped animal. We'll be sure to cheer you on later tonight. All the best, Paddy boy, Frank said, as he activated a trapdoor lift which lowered Patrick's chair down to the dark depths beneath where they were. As the trapdoor closed shut, Frank turned and smiled at the brothers. There, you see? Little details that will keep the audience on edge. But you said that 14862 was a good thing, Giz exclaimed. He didn't seem to think it was. I never said it was going to be good for him, did I? Frank asked slowly. 14862 is given to an employee to take over the rank of another who failed to undertake that rank. Well, the excuse for the failure didn't seem fair to Patrick. It seemed fair to me, though, said Frank, giving the brothers a look that ended the argument there and then. Miranda appeared at the door again. What is it, Miranda? Sir, Skid is here to see you with urgent news. Oh, thank you. Well, Skid, what have you to report? Any news on the reproduction of that serum? Skid saluted smartly as he stood before Frank. He gave the two brothers a sideways glance before turning back. Sir, I've to report some aggressive actions happening at the railway station at Tamon O'Brien. There appears to be an individual who claims that he has the choice of when or where the tax money is to be collected. A young fellow with a black jacket with yellow stripes along the waist. Sounds familiar, whispered Grinder to Gears. I also noticed that the railway has taken on new staff too, sir. There might be more of them, from what I saw. One of them even had blue hair. Gears thought for a moment. Blue hair? He inquired. Who gave you the right to butt in? Snapped Skid, but Frank held his hand up. Answer the question, Skid, he said calmly. Yes, there did appear to be a blue haze on the other bloke's head. There might have been two others and a chick. He paused as he lustily thought about that figure in the shadows. But that's about all, sir. So they are alive, said Gears. The other 5 I mentioned earlier, sir. Frank's face grew very concerned. If that's the case, then perhaps the talks from amongst the slaves are true then. We'll have to ensure that whatever plans they have cooked up, they must be stopped at all costs. Well, that might not be the case, sir, said Gear, stepping forward. Me and Grider know this group more than from what Skid has said. Chances are they're like us, trying to lay low until they can proceed with any further plans they have in mind. And knowing Mark Carson, who was the guy you encountered, Skid, is bound to have a plan of sorts brooding in his head, added Grinder. Not to mention that brain box Roy Clements. Frank pondered the matter at hand as he reseated himself. The stress of what lay before him was starting to affect his dosage of serum. Already his hands were slowly starting to wrinkle. What were those 5 currently doing when you were there? He inquired. As far as I know, they were fixing up some claptrap of a steamer and coach, Skid replied. Probably planning on using it to transport something. Perhaps that machine, and to get it working again, suggested Gears. But they can't go anywhere unless they have the fuel, Grinder pointed out, and Frank here has it in his possession now, so what's there to worry about? Despite what you say, Grinder, my dear chap, there might be more to that machine than what we already know of it, and chances are it could still be far more dangerous even without fuel. Skid, Frank barked. Have 10 of your strongest men gathered up and uproot that machine in its current location and bring it back here. Hopefully by then I would have an idea of what's to be done with it. He turned and remembered the brothers. Miranda, I need to rest to gather my thoughts. Take these 2 of a small tour of the fort. I'm sure during that they might be inspired to help me later on with my plans. Yes, sir, Miranda said quietly, and she escorted the 2 out of the room, leaving Frank to dwell on his thoughts and schemes. They walked through several corridors, each one lined with lit torches. Miranda's ankle chains echoed loudly against the stone walls as they approached an overhead gallery. These are the workshops where the gathering and the workings are being carried out, Miranda said. It's all right if you don't want to look. However, Grinder took a step forward and peered over. There was a whoosh as a cloud of grey smoke engulfed him. After coughing several lungfuls of the stuff, he wafted away till he could see what the activity was down below. It looked like a quarry and steel industry had merged themselves together into one. At one end, a large group of frail people were busy hacking away into a large black rock face and loading several trucks with rubble. Each one of them were fettered with chains similar to Miranda's. They mined the iron ore from these dugouts and sent it to be filtered and ready to be taken out to our foundries, Miranda explained. There it is melted and forged to make either machine parts for the fortress defense systems or for the soldiers' armored vehicles. Then another group of people began moving the stone towards the chute, where it led to a man-operated conveyor belt. There the rocks were filtered and sorted before the chosen rocks were sent to the other trucks awaiting at the bottom. These were then taken to another room out of view. I don't see any guards about, noted Grinder. Sure, they can stop for a breather, at least to gather some energy. But they can't, Miranda stated simply, for fear of being executed. They work non-stop and only stop when the guards say so. What? Grinder said in disbelief. But that's just plain stupid. A clattering sound came from below, and they looked down to see what it was. A young woman had fallen while loading the trucks, as one had rolled over her chains, trapping her in place. She tried to roll the truck off, but she was too weak and was already being loaded quickly with the ore. But a panic had risen inside of her as she tugged with all her might to free herself. At last the truck shifted, and she fell back as it rolled over the chains, freeing her. Without another thought, she quickly got to her feet, grabbed her drop basket, and scrambled back up to her group to resume mining. However, no sooner had she started running, there came a thunderous bang. Grinding gears jumped as the lifeless body of the girl fell, smashing her skull against an ore slab before lying still on the ground. Nobody did anything as they resumed their work, though some were clearly shaking with fear. The brothers looked round and saw that a guard had appeared out of the hidden area of the site and was busy reloading his weapon before vanishing within the crowd again. Even if you fail to return to your post within the minute, you'd be executed for dawdling, Miranda said, turning to guide them on. This way. Where did Patrick work? Asked Gears. He was showing a little concern for the old man when he saw him being dragged away.
He was one of the Smiths, answered Miranda. I've known him since I was first brought here. He was like an uncle to me and helped me through the worst times during the first few days. Though I just wish it wasn't so short. I'd been chosen to be Frank's personal assistant not long afterwards. I sometimes saw him in the evenings, but each time I saw him, he was as frail as all the others were. How many in total? Asked Grinder. There were more than 200 of us. When new slaves were brought in, they are all checked and enrolled to take part on chosen roles. Some go to the mines, some to the foundries. Others do servant jobs and maintain the fortress. And then there are those who entertain the troops. Entertain? I'd rather not talk about it, Miranda said, looking away. What? Is it like, that sort of thing? Asked Grinder carefully. He made a face of a description which at first puzzled Miranda before Gears went over and whispered a translation into her ear. Her brow furrowed as her face lowered. The entertainment I was referring to is mainly what you'd seen earlier in the courtyards, she said calmly. They mainly rely on drag racing and demolition derbies for their main form of entertainment. She paused for a second before hesitantly whispering, But there are parts of here where acts of that nature are being made by the sick and twisted guards. Those who are enlisted in that dark area are never seen again. Yes, well, thankfully we don't go into that sort of thing, Gears said quickly. We're more racing, derbies, etc. That's our form of entertainment. Miranda said, unmoved. She walked ahead of them. Why'd you ask her a question like that? Hissed Gears, clipping Grinder on the back of the head. I thought you knew better. I don't know, it just came out all of a sudden, Grinder said meekly. He was thinking the same, though the thought of the derby seemed to take his interest, and he was keen to see more of it. They might be busy preparing for the upcoming show, Miranda said cautiously, but you can see the practices taking place from your room later. I look forward to that, said Grinder, smiling, though Miranda didn't seem too keen. How long have you been here, Miranda? Asked Gears. He could tell that Miranda didn't like doing this guide stuff, and decided to change the subject. About 12 years. I was only 12 when they took me and my mother away from our home. Mum tried to escape, but was killed upon our first arrival here. I did the best I could to survive here under Patrick's limited guidance, but I was one of the lucky ones to be recently enrolled to standard servant duties. At least with this, I don't suffer as much as I did on the floor. Do you miss your home? Have you any family left? Just my father, but I don't know what's become of him since we were taken away. I miss him dearly. I understand, said Gears. He took this moment to try and think about his own parents. His earliest memory of them was foggy. He remembered one person whom he believed to be his father, but he could only remember seeing this man with a group of others. After that, he never saw him again. But the odd letter would be sent on prison notepaper, sending his regards. As for his mother, well, there were times where he wished his mother remembered who he and Grinder were. Frazzled hair, shrunken eyes, and dressed in a tasteless set of garments that would make even the tardiest women you see on TV soap operas start asking questions. Though there was a time he did remember his mother looking like a proper mum. But like with Dad, it was very foggy, and the only memory he had was her stating to someone whom he can't picture properly, but she said that her son was all the gears in motion. Maybe that's where his name came from. Strange though, he never really liked the name, and yet somehow, on the other hand, had chosen to accept it for some reason. But he can't remember why. But then again, Frank did state that his name had value to it, almost as if it had a purpose. He couldn't think what, but he hoped that he'd have a better role to play in this new place than compared to the likes of the Motorcar Society. He could see that Grinder was already chatting away about his interests about taking part in the derby to Miranda, whom he was glad to see was not taking any interest at all, but instead was giving him several looks which made him do the same when he thought she wasn't looking. He thought back again at what she had told him and Grinder about their arrival, and what it could mean, but again, he thought her predictions were no more than just words of false hope, and he had to tell her that. But then Frank seemed to believe in it too. Could those railway lot really take out this freak? It had taken Corpse till late afternoon for his efforts to be tested.
Whitehouse and Casey had done their best to get most of the rust removed and patched up. Cars had been spending most of his time with Wilbert and Harry discussing plans on how they can help with the railway, once he had calmed down enough to be seen again. "Are you sure that this will work, Corpse?" asked Whitehouse, as Corpse increased the feed. "Hopefully," he said, "though I'm a bit concerned with the limited number of tanks we have. We'll need to save on what we have for the main journey, though this should be enough for a quick test." "I knew that converting this to gas would have its drawbacks," said Casey, "but would you listen? Look, it's enough to get us at least as far as to the tech and back, so what's there to complain about? The fact that it's not coal-fired is the main reason for complaints. Oh, will you just shut up and get on the footplate?" "Shan't," grumbled Casey. "I want no part in this. Look, I need you to be the driver of this engine. None of us can drive a steam engine better than you." "I'll drive it," said Whitehouse, stepping forward. "If Chris is going to continue on grumbling over the smallest of things—" All right, sighed Casey, pushing Whitehouse aside. "I'll drive this machine, but under protest," he added, as he checked the gauges. "Fine," smiled Corpse, and winked at Whitehouse. "Do you guys need help?" asked Jane from nearby. She had not long finished cooking them a small dinner, and was gathering up the tin plates and mugs to be cleaned. "I think we're all right for now, Jane, but thanks," said Corpse. Maybe another cup of tea wouldn't hurt?" "No worries," smiles Jane, "but just let me get these here cleaned up first." Jane didn't mind doing the cooking, but she thought to herself there now, it did seem kind of odd that she didn't get much involved with the more work side of work than the others were doing. Hopefully when Cara sorts out the trains with Harry and Wilbert, she should be able to pull her own weight to help. At least something that would help take her mind off her current thoughts, or at least put them to rest. "So, if we run tomorrow's train as a special excursion, then hopefully that should be enough to draw in our crowds." "That's all nice, Mark, but I don't think anyone here will be interested in going, especially with the soldiers and all." "I had thought about that, and I suggested that we use it as a way to boost the morales. What better way to do that than enhance the glory days of steam by running a seaside excursion?" "The glory days?" said Harry slowly. Cars looked at them before realizing that in this dimension, the glory days of steam never happened. He thought of something else. "Well, then, we can make it the first of hopefully many. Trust me, it'll work. What stock have you got that will be used for an excursion? Through coaches and all that?" Those 3 that we have for the soldiers' yearly tour to Antwerp," mused Harry. "But what state they're in since last time, I can't say." "Oh, I'm sure the others will give them a good scrub out here while we get the rest sorted out. Now, for an engine. Chris did say he saw an engine called the Irish Giant. I'm sure he will have a field day with that one." "Now look," Harry said sternly, raising a finger. "It's all well and good for making this up, but you fail to remember that this railway also has another purpose. It also serves the fort of Congrove, and a service must be taken up there to collect the waste at the smelters at the halfway point." "Well, we can do that too," said Carr simply. "I haven't forgotten that, Harry, and I assure you that everything will go on as usual." "That's what I'm afraid of," said Harry, but Wilbert was all for it. "Let the lad do what he thinks best," he said. "I know he's given us a rough start, but, I mean, it can't get as bad as what we're in now, can it?" Harry sighed and thumbed Carr to the door. "There are some wooden notice boards in there that you can use to make up your signs and some paint." "Thanks," smiled Cars. They all heard a shrill whistle and headed out towards the window to see Casey and Corpse drive the old engine from its siding back and forth along a small fraction of line. "Ah, looks like Rory's got it running again," commented Cars, grinning. "I don't think there's a thing he can't fix." "How about your enthusiasm?" muttered Harry as Cars left the office. "I don't see how that group has him as a leader. He just comes up with a solution and expects it to go smoothly when we know it won't. And no doubt after all the work they put into it, he'll claim the leading role." And if his ideas about our new services, well, you think he'd believe we have all these things at our disposal, added Wilbert. "Well, he's enthusiastic, I'll grant you that. However, I think I might have an idea on how to bring that young Mark down a few pegs for being too boastful." "What have you in mind?" asked Harry. Wilbert tapped a wrinkled finger against his aged face. "Just wait and see," he said. "I think a change of role is in order."